Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Darshan Talks. I'm your host, Darshan Kulkarni. It's my mission to help patients trust the products they depend on. And as part of doing the trusting, it's really important to meet patients where they are. And our guest for today is an expert in that field because he is currently doing a 50-page analysis or a 50-page review of how do you actually monitor patients from where they are. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I'm really excited about that. As you may know, I'm an attorney, I'm a pharmacist, and I advise companies with FDA-regulated products. So if you think about drugs, worry about devices, consider health, or obsess over pharmacy, this is the podcast for you. I do have to specify that both my guest and I are attorneys, so nothing we say on here is legal advice and should not be construed as such. I do these podcasts because they're a lot of fun and hopefully because I get to talk to really fun, interesting people like our guest today. So if you like what you're listening to, please like, subscribe, please leave a comment. And if you know someone who'd enjoy this, because I know I'm going to enjoy this, please share this link, share this podcast. If you need to reach me, you can reach me on Twitter, DarshanTalks, or just go to our website at DarshanTalks.com. Our podcast today is with the General Counsel for Carion, and we're going to talk a little bit more about Carion before we get further into it. He is based on the conversation, I've known him for a few years at this point, but I want to keep it tight to where we are. But he just came back from vacation, and he is a very active father. Whether or not he wants to be as active as he is right now. So you should care about today's discussion, because if you are in the world where you're looking at decentralized clinical trials, if you're in the world where you're talking about healthcare, but where the patient is not where you want the patient to be, this is the conversation for you. Our guest for today, the General Counsel for Carion, Matt Fisher. Matt, how are you?
Doing well. Thanks for the intro, Darshan. And I love that tagline where you're saying it's, trying to better understand where the patient fits into the system. Because for us at Carion, that is really one of our grounding principles and kind of one of the principal drives from when the company was founded. It's, a lot of the dev work on our platform has focused on making the experience for the patient as good as it possibly can. And I know our engineering team takes a lot of pride in the fact that it is really easy to use. And once people get on our platform, we actually have really high, ongoing engagement rates, which is pretty cool to see.
So let's talk a little bit about that. I know we had like a whole bunch of topics planned and we talked about it like 3 minutes before, but it sounds like that topic's already out the window because we're going to talk about this a little bit. The two things that pop out in my head is when we talked about meeting the patient where they should be. One of the big things people thought about was Uber, and what they were trying to do was, we'll meet patients where they should be, in the hospital. I'll send you an Uber, come on over. But that's not what Carion is doing. Carion is switching that process around. Can you talk a little bit about the success rate and the give and take associated with meeting patients in their homes versus bringing them to the hospitals?
Yeah, certainly. So it's kind of the focus for our platform is very much on remote monitoring, whether it be traditional remote patient monitoring programs, hospital at home, really any type of tracking where the care team is trying to get a better understanding of what's happening with patients or individuals in their daily lives. When our customers use our platform, they tell the patient about it, and then the patient can sign up they sign up for it, but then they can access it through either a web interface or a mobile app. And it's, you take information that's being collected from a wearable, whether it be like an Apple Watch or a Fitbit, or depending on the use case, like we do a bunch of kind of post-cardiac surgery recovery. So, you might need a blood pressure cuff or a scale. That, the information that gets generated from that gets automatically transmitted into the app, and then the care team can see it. And not only the care team see it, but the patient can see it. So the patient can themselves understand how they're tracking against their goals or be able to see trends over time. And that can be the spur for the patient themselves reaching out to their care team and, raising a concern because maybe they're having a not so great day in the recovery and they're worried, do I need to go to the emergency room or do I need to go do something? And they can interact with a clinician and be told, nope, this is all normal, like don't worry about it, or maybe this is something that's starting to show some concern and come in. So and which I think goes directly to the point you were saying of how do we provide probably the most efficient and the highest quality care without just telling people, oh, come in for a visit. So it's kind of that type of interaction, which is pretty cool to see. And then it's, so that's, I think, one particular use case, but it's also, we also have one client that's not even the traditional healthcare sphere. It's actually a gym. And the gym is using us to replace, it's a pretty, I'll call it high end. And just by high end, I mean, they have very, skilled coaches and trainers there who develop pretty comprehensive plans for the people who are there. And then they can, they're tracking their food intake, they're tracking their exercise, like all these different measures that their trainer can see and then kind of customize their plan. So but again, it's people who are motivated or people who are breaking into it and want to improve their health can start to see, what's happening within their daily lives. And that, it starts to create this self-fulfilling feedback loop where you see it, you get invested in it, and all of a sudden it becomes habit. Or it just kind of gives you that visual that's, I think something that we're not used to being able to have ready access to. And it really does make an impact on, on overall health and well-being in the daily life.
So as you started talking, I was just taking notes. I have like 9 different points of places I can go to with that. But let's start with the beginnings, which is one of the things I worried about with the use of wearables has always been this idea of garbage in, garbage out. And how do you sift through the garbage? And what I mean by that is I can't trust Fitbit to give me the accurate number of steps I took today. How do I trust it to give me a readout on my EKG? Having said that, I know, for example, I just read this article where I think an Apple iWatch saved someone because they found out that they were having a heart attack or something off their iWatch. So obviously some work, others don't, but it's just inconsistent. So how do you tell and how do you sift through the garbage?
Yeah, I think to some degree it depends on the particular use case that we're talking about. So it's, if it's the more, I'll call it the more clinical ones where it's, that post-cardiac surgery, or we do weight management, or nutrition might not be the best example because there someone's actually logging the particular meal that they're eating, but then that gets vetted against a database that we subscribe to that gives the actual nutritional content for the food. But let's use the weight management or the cardiac. In those cases, we're not relying on a consumer wearable. In that case, it's an actual medical grade blood pressure cuff or scale where the clinical customer that we're working with trusts the particular device that we're using. So you have a better comfort with that particular device and the data that's coming in. Not to say that there couldn't be some concerns with it. And we've actually seen some of the devices that we've used, like the manufacturers experience issues, and then we push them on it because, as you're implying, we want to make sure that accurate data is being presented not just to the patients, but to the care teams. But kind of with all that said, there are still some cases where, like an Apple Watch or a Fitbit, or, we've got a new use case that we're working with a client on around sleep apnea, where we're actually pulling sleep cycle data from a Garmin device. And based on what the clinician's telling us, the information that's coming in from that on sleep cycles is sufficient for the use case that this particular physician is trying to do, and doesn't necessarily need the fingertip pulse oximeter that it would kind of be the type of device that'd be used if you go into a sleep center. So, I think it's kind of everyone's kind of feeling it out and figuring out, how accurate are the data and how reliable are the data. And it seems like on the whole, the care teams and the clinicians that we're working with feel that it's close, either fully accurate or close enough where they are able to, identify what's happening. And, if necessary, bring someone in or do a telehealth style interaction, or, some type of intervention where, they've got, where they can get people back onto the right track. So it's, I think, but, ultimately I do think all of that's going to keep refining, because I think the devices are just going to keep improving. It's, if we're thinking about the consumer ones, I would say in the grand scheme, they're still relatively early on within, the development. But yeah, I mean, the accuracy does leave something to be desired. It's, but it also depends on how you're using it. So, I give an example, like my son, regular, young kid has a Garmin Junior or some type of Garmin device, because he used his own birthday money to buy it, and he wanted to track his steps. And it's like, we'll be doing the same types of things and his steps will be way higher than mine. But it's like, if we're playing basketball, I think it's tracking him dribbling. Whereas my Apple Watch, I have to pick which wrist I'm wearing it on. So, I wear it on my left wrist, even though I'm left-handed, but I tell it I'm left-handed. So I think it filters out if I'm dribbling a basketball. So it's, I think the sophistication, in that regard is going to get better. And then, but I think you also need to kind of think about who's using it and, and kind of what the goals might be with that particular individual. Just thinking about increasing activity, for the most part, you might not be seeing people who had a high baseline activity anyway, because then maybe that wouldn't be something that you're trying to track for improvement, unless you're talking about an elite athlete, and then you're probably got a million other devices in there. So it's, I think with all that being said, it's kind of, as I said, the devices are getting better, but at the same time, you have to kind of have a good appreciation and understanding of why you're tracking a particular metric.
So I think I think it's fascinating. The part that I think is, first of all, that really stood out to me was the fact that you got competitive with your kid. He has more steps than me. This is not fair. But I thought that was awesome. Just the numbers and how we operate as individuals. So I think that's awesome in so many different ways. But I think that the part that also stood out for me was this idea that, and I'm re-emphasizing what I think you just said, which is this acts as an initial filter, if you will. And the data you get is not conclusive. It's not intended to be conclusive right now. It's intended to be a baseline that is good enough to go, okay, come in for an additional visit because we think you're showing some symptoms or some data that suggests that you need further review, as opposed to being a one-off, we trust the data as it stands. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, I think that's a pretty accurate synthesis, and it's kind of also part of what you're saying, what you summarized there is it's giving a more complete picture of individuals, because it's not, as you said, we're not trying to say we're trusting this and it's the final picture of things. We're starting to actually get more insight into what's happening to people in their daily lives, because go back 10 years, all you had was, if it was a healthy person like you or me, you'd be in there, you'd see your doctor maybe once a year, if not less frequently. And even if you had, a chronic illness or something or some other condition where you had to be coming in more frequently, maybe you're in there like 4 to 6 times a year. Yeah. So now you're getting a lot more data points, but, kind of going back to, the question you raised earlier, is it just garbage in, garbage out? It's, you're applying some type of analytics to it. So you're not just getting all the raw data, you're getting it charted out. You can kind of see trends. So if something, if one particular reading, let's use blood pressure as an example, if one particular reading is completely out of whack, you can say, okay, maybe we should re-record that and figure out, is there actually something happening here, or was it, did something just happen at that particular time? Like, did you have trouble using, did the device malfunction, or, had you just been doing something right before taking the reading? So it provides that opportunity for more, I'd say, real-time analysis and real-time feedback. And in the long run, it's kind of what we're seeing is it's helping to reduce the need to come in, because you can catch things earlier on and prevent a larger issue from occurring. We actually unsolicited received feedback from a patient who was using our service. Like this patient, and we've actually published this story, but like the patient reached out to the chair of our board, who's one of the co-founders, through LinkedIn, and said, did you actually found Carion? And he said, yes. And he's like, I want to tell you my experience with it. And he, this patient was talking about how valuable for him it was to be able to see the trending of his data over time. He happened to have a cardiac procedure early on in COVID. So, a nurse was supposed to be coming to his house a lot to be taking blood pressure and other readings. And he's like, I didn't want anyone coming in, because who knows what risk is being created with that. So now with the connected devices and the app, he could record all of it, interact with his care team. And he said a couple of times, like, he had questions and he was able to get feedback either through a chat or a quick video visit that prevented him from having to go either to the ED or to an office visit. And not only that, then he said, like, as he kept going through his journey, he finished the one segment and then went into, I think, like physical therapy, and could show the physical therapy team all the data from the app, because they didn't have it, because it was healthcare. So he was in a different silo at that point, even though I think he said it was all the same system. But it was able to show, okay, you just took my blood pressure here and it looks a little high, but here, look at this chart from the past like 3 months. And it shows that he actually was trending in a good direction, that it was remaining stable. And, maybe it was that typical reading in the office where it got elevated. So it's, those types of interactions are pretty powerful. And we love to hear about them.
That's so fascinating. But here, let me ask you this question though. I tried talking to my doctor at one point, going, I have all this data I can give to you because I have a Fitbit and I do all this stuff. And the doctor's reaction was basically, I get too much data. I don't want this much data. How do you battle, or how do you educate healthcare practitioners who go, I have all the data I want, I don't want your data?
Yeah, I think to some degree it's the people who are signing up with us are already thinking of how can I use this data, or how can I better interact with patients, or not better interact. I think that's probably not the right way to characterize it, but how can how can we shift how we're practicing and try to harness what's available there? Because it's I think a lot of people do have devices. So I think part of winning that battle is saying, okay, we're not just randomly collecting information. We're not just telling people, okay, you've got a Fitbit or all these other wearables, just dump your data on us. It's here's a particular goal that we're focusing on. So it's you've got a use case in mind. So kind of going back to it, it's a lot of times, especially if we're working with like a physician practice, we're doing remote patient monitoring, which is a specific, and I'll use Medicare as the kind of guiding light here. That is a defined program. There are 4 defined CPT or billing codes for remote patient monitoring, and it's designed to address either a chronic or acute condition. So it's, you're not just saying, okay, you're healthy and I want to see all this baseline data. It's you're actually trying to set a care plan, and you're trying to advance a particular goal. So you're not also just collecting all the potential data. You're identifying maybe it's activity counts, so like steps, or maybe it's weight or blood pressure. So specific actual data points that you're looking at. And then again, as I said, at least through us, it's not just the raw data flowing through, although that's accessible if they want it. It's you can chart it out, you can sort it, you can look at it through all these different filters, so you can actually get to what you're trying to see. So it's, I think the concern about being flooded with data is definitely a justifiable one and a valid one, because there is so much being created all the time. You have to be able to have some degree of analytics applied to it, so that way you get information that you can act upon, as opposed to having something where now you're trying to sort through it and figure out what to do on top of an already busy day and likely an already overwhelmed plate. So it's again, I think it goes back to the presentation of it.
So at Carion, do you guys find yourself creating custom dashboards depending on the audience?
To some degree, we'll have some custom dashboards, depending, especially if it's a new use case that we're getting into. But because of all that work, we've also now developed a lot of templates and just a lot of, within the within the care team side of the dashboard, a lot of filters that they can apply. So it's, kind of a little, I would say it's a little bit of both, but there's, probably not as much customization happening at this point as there might have been in the past.
Okay, only because I found the idea, and the use case you gave earlier I thought was fascinating, where you said gym owners are actually reaching out going, I want to track the individuals working with me. And on one hand, I kind of go, that's awesome. My second reaction is, you're getting all this data. Are my trainers actually using it? Or is it something they tell them that you have access to and no one ever actually looks at it? It obviously makes for a really good use case and just excellent data. But my third question would be, who owns the data?
So for us, it's the patient, and that has been and frankly, I was actually, I think we're kind of talking about this in the prep, that we got a question recently from a potential customer saying, can you explain our contract to us? And so I was then which caused me to go back through our template so I could prepare a quick summary of it. But we have a data section, and in our master subscription agreement, it says client. We have the client, so that would be the person, the entity signing up for us. And so data that they enter belongs to them. But then it also refers to our basic terms of use, which say individual users own their data. And kind of in the early days, this shifted a little bit, but kind of one of the early conceptions was even thinking, say you or I sign up for it, and then our physician is using it, we would have had to select to have our physician have access to our data. Now we kind of make it a little bit more seamless, just because I don't think anyone would want to have to deal with it. But at the end of the day, we also do remind our customers, like, you'll get a copy of it because by us providing a service to, say, a physician practice, we're their business associate. So under HIPAA, the PHI, or the patient information or protected health information that we're collecting, just by those regulations, is being collected on behalf of the physician's practice. But at the same time, we're basically saying there is a dual copy of the data that still belongs to the patient, and they're always going to have access to that. And in fact, if someone happens to not continue with our service, we'll turn off their access, but the patient can keep using it essentially in a direct-to-consumer, just with no care team attached to it. It's so in essence, it becomes almost a personal health record for them, but they could continue to use it. So it's again, a very long roundabout, or not roundabout, but just a long detailed way of saying, from our perspective, we view it as the patient owns their own data.
And how long do you hold it though?
So as long as someone is active, so actually, we'll kind of put it into a few different buckets. We'll always maintain a copy of it as long as our customer is a customer, because again, we're maintaining a copy that's theirs. If someone asks to delete their account, then we turn off their account. But because if the customer that they're associated with is still active, we need to maintain the PHI for their benefit. But if all of that, say that they're associated, an individual is no longer associated with a customer and it's just them, if they ask for a deletion, we'll delete it. So it's kind of it all depends on kind of our regulatory. I would say it depends on our regulatory obligations. But if all else being equal, and it's the individual is able to have that final say, we will delete.
No, but I didn't know if, for example, the customer you had with them has sort of left Carion. The patient doesn't access the data. Is there like a drop-off point? I'm making this up, like 2 years after the last reach out, or
so one, I'll say probably one answer to it is we haven't had to have that experience yet. So but I think what would probably end up happening is a trigger to say, okay, you've been active for X amount of time. Are you going to want to re-engage? Especially if it's that they're no longer associated with say a system customer or practice customer, and if they're not, then kind of have that indication of, okay, if you're done using it, then we'll deactivate your account and we can delete it. But be able to present those types of options. But again, that's in the case where a patient, we call it a patient user, is disconnected and is essentially a direct-to-consumer user at that point. But so long as someone's associated with an active client that's a system or a practice, the data is going to be maintained, just because we have that obligation to that particular customer through our frankly, both our probably contractual and our regulatory obligations.
No, the reason I asked that question in my case is because, as you know, I negotiate a lot of clinical trial agreements. And in those cases, the clinical trial agreements, and at this moment, I happen to be working with the clinical trial site, so doctor's office or a hospital or the like. And in those cases, most pharmaceutical companies go, and you'll store data for the rest of time, basically. And you're kind of going, yeah, I'm happy to store the data for the rest of time if you pay for it. But what time am I allowed to turn off that faucet is the question that I've always sort of battled with. And there are some FDA requirements, but should you go beyond what those are? And what is the healthcare standard is really what I was trying to get a feeling for. And what it sounds like is there's no standard. There really just depends on where you are and regulatory standards and all that good stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's from that standard perspective, because when we're working with like say a hospital system or a physician practice, we're the business associate. Technically the record retention requirements don't apply to us. I think from that perspective, it's probably different from the clinical trial world. But I think kind of the general rule I usually hear is like physicians, if they're an independent practice, I think it's usually probably like a 6 to 10 year retention time period, depending on the state. And then hospitals can be, 20 plus years, again, depending on the state. So, I just happen to know that, like, I'm in Massachusetts. So like, I remember at one point here, I think hospitals were 50 years, and then that got shortened sometime in the not too distant past. But it's just kind of thinking about that. It's, so if a customer were to terminate with us, we would say, we would offer to basically do a data dump to them, so they would get a copy of all the information, in a mutually agreed format. But it's, so that way we can help that customer fulfill its obligation without us having to maintain the copy. Although from what I hear from my more technical folks, frankly, that data storage cost is at this point in time pretty minimal. Because you can get a tera or petabytes, or pick your unit of measurement for relatively low cost.
Yeah. We're now at exabytes or something right now, so it's ridiculous.
No, that goes beyond me. That's when I start asking my engineering team too many questions, and they pretend like they've got something better to do, which is probably the case.
So let me ask you this other component, which is we talked a little bit about data ownership, and we talked a little bit about which I thought you guys had a great answer with the patient owns the data, because you rarely see people sort of officially go, that's where we are, which is awesome. But let's flip that around. I'm actually referring back to a link you posted on LinkedIn in the last couple of days, which was cybersecurity and how we're dealing with hacking. Has that been an issue Carion sort of keeps at the top of its mind, and how do you deal with it as a business and as an attorney to keep those issues front of mind, if you will?
Yeah, so security and cybersecurity, very thankfully, have been another one of the overriding principles from day one. Kind of, and I think I was talking about this with my CEO not too long ago too. Because we talk about security quite a bit. But it's one of the extreme benefits that I think we have is, the founders and the engineering team are very experienced. It's not kind of the prototypical startup that you see in the headlines of people who are relatively young in their careers. The group that was co-founded the company and have been working on it mostly from day one, they've actually been through multiple companies together, and have come from a diversity of background. It's healthcare was not their traditional background. They're actually in telecom before. So they've seen the evolution of technology, but have also been building for a long time. So they had a very solid understanding and drive to want to have security very much baked into the product from the beginning. So it actually, when I first started working with the company, which was I only in retrospect found this out, but I ended up meeting them, I think, within a month or two of the company being founded. But right from the start, as that really early stage startup, I started interacting with them and representing them, or representing us, because they wanted to know HIPAA and they wanted to make sure they were doing things correctly from that perspective, understanding that they were already going well above and beyond any requirements that the regs would call for. So and that is definitely still carried through, and it's actually pretty amazing, because I'll have people, we use Slack a lot for internal communication. I'll have people send me questions saying, is this okay? Is it okay if we do this? Or if we're thinking about adding a new component in, it's like, how is this going to impact our security posture? Is it going to be okay under HIPAA? So it's, from me, from the legal perspective, it's really fascinating and really cool to see people that invested in it. And then it's, whenever especially when working with bigger health systems or, other vendors that are trying to add a component that we can bring, we go through pretty detailed security questionnaires and analyses, and people are always very impressed with how we stand. And in fact, we're also now going through a SOC 2 phase or type 2 audit. And in our readiness review, our auditor actually said, you're one of the best prepared startups that we've ever worked with in terms of, what was already there. Because, they were telling us, you don't actually have to make any material changes. You just have to document a few things better, because you're doing everything that you should be. And then, and kind of another example of that is right from the start, we've been using an outside pen tester, and we do that twice a year. And the last time we went through that, there was, I think, 6 low risk findings, and I think 5 of them were things that we had just made an operational decision that we could live with it. usually focused around end user types of things, where you're not going to make an end user change their password like every 30 days, because I don't think anyone would use a product if they had to do that. But it's those types of things where it's, I think that's one of those areas where we can show a distinction with, how much attention has been paid to it and how consistently it's being considered on a daily basis. So again, as I said, it's been very gratifying to not have to be preaching and trying to convince people to think about this stuff. But sometimes it's, saying, just marveling at what's happening. And sometimes we've been I think following some of the guidelines where other people are a couple steps behind. So we have to explain why we're not doing it, why the way that they think we should be doing it, but we're explaining, no, this is the most current iteration of NIST guidance, for example. And this is this is what we're complying with.
I love that your current standard is my competitors are doing it wrong, or at least not as fresh or as up to date as they should be. So that's probably the best place you can be. Matt, I usually try to keep this for about 15, 20 minutes. You're already well ahead because you're just a great conversationalist. So thank you. Couple of questions before we sort of close up. Is there a question you'd like to ask the audience based on what we discussed?
It's a question that I'd like to ask the audience.
Yeah.
Yeah. I probably the question I would pose to people is, what are you doing to kind of interact with the patients in your practice, and how are you trying to, I'd say, establish a higher and better overall baseline of health? Because it's, I think, as we know, medicine can oftentimes be very reactive in terms of how the system traditionally drove focus, but now we're getting into more value-based care and thinking about, keeping people healthy as opposed to getting them back to health. And so, my question to you is, how are you doing that?
I love that question, because you're right. I'd always thought of remote patient monitoring, or I thought about telehealth as really just an adjunct to the care we already have. But what you're really pointing out is the role it now plays in preventative health, which is the bigger role to play anyways. And we've been talking about that for 20 years, 30 years, about how we should be helping with being healthy. So no, I love the question. So I'd be curious what they say. Two other questions. One is, what's something you learned in the last month that you didn't expect?
I don't know, maybe this isn't necessarily so unexpected, but one of the things I've been doing is has been doing a deep dive into Medicaid coverage of RPM. Yeah. And it's, one of the things that's been surprising me is sometimes how difficult it is to find what the reimbursement rate actually is. Even when there's a fee schedule, they might not be using the same codes or a consistent set of codes, even if the in a couple of states, I've seen the regulations say RPM is covered and you have to cover it in this way, but then the codes I expect aren't there. So I'm just, you and I are probably very informed in terms of how regulations work and kind of how the industry works. And, when you have difficulty with that type of understanding and knowledge of finding answers, you kind of scratch your head of how is anyone else going to find it who doesn't have that, the time, right, or even the inklings of where to go.
Yeah. No, I that's a really interesting answer. The bureaucracy of government getting ahead of itself. Simple question, third question, if you will. What made you happy in the last week?
In the last week, seeing my son play baseball. He's doing summer all-stars, so he's been doing very well. So it's just seeing how much fun he has with it, and then along with that, just all of the crazy random stuff that my daughter will say. She can be very deadpan without intending to, but it's usually very accurate and funny when she does it.
So it sounds like an Aubrey Plaza kind of take on it. Do you know who that is?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I would love to say I watched all of Parks and Rec, but when I convinced my wife to start watching it over her objections, she liked it so much that she then burned through all of it, and I got to see maybe a 10th of the show.
We'll have a whole different discussion on that because I'm having the exact same problem with my girlfriend. But yes, I refuse to introduce her to shows because I know she's going to burn through it, and then I'm left with not watching it because I don't want to see it again with her. Last question. You sort of made a really interesting pitch for Carion, especially, and I'm still obsessing over this because I think it's such a great use case with the gym piece, because I've just never seen that done. It's awesome. How can people reach you if they have questions, or how can people reach Carion if they have questions?
Yeah, so if you want to learn more about Carion, you can go to our website, which is go.carion.com. For me, I'm matt.fisher@carion.com. So that's email, or you can find me on Twitter at Matt_R_Fisher. And even though hopefully it's on the screen, maybe, but if people are listening to it, Fisher is Fisher.
I'm gonna put it right now. So Matt _R_ FISCHER at
no C.
No seeds. Yeah, I'm glad I asked. FISHER.
Yes.
At Carion.com. And is that right?
No, so the Matt_R_Fisher is my Twitter handle, and then email is just matt.fisher. Okay, too many different ways.
Hold on. See, this is why we're asking these questions that people can follow. And is that good?
Yes.
So that's your Twitter handle.
Yeah.
And then we have matt.fisher, FISHER, at Carion.com.
Yes.
That good?
Yep. And then people can also find me on LinkedIn just by searching for me.
And that's Matt Fisher.
Yep.
Great. Matt, this was awesome having you. Thank you so much for coming on. Oh, by the way, one more thing. Matt, you have your own podcast.
Yes.
Tell us about that one.
Yeah, so it's called Healthcare de Jure. So the two women who came up with it love to do some wordplay, so playing off of legal terms, but it's on the Healthcare Now radio network, and get to interview great folks. So I'll have to return the favor and have you on soon. Be able to talk about pharmacy and law, and any fun thing that you want to do. But it's kind of like you, I get to have a lot of really cool discussions, and just learn from my guests, which is the best thing in the world.
Right, Matt. Again, what is it called again? Healthcare
de Jure.
Okay, I'm gonna wait for you to put that in. I'm gonna copy that. Is that how it's pronounced? I've been calling it de jure, but now I learned.
Well, we they call it Healthcare de Jure because the main focus is picking up on hot topics of the day. So pronounce it as if you're speaking French, so healthcare of the day, but went with the de jure for the legal term, which I can never remember what it actually means because I'm a bad lawyer and don't do Latin.
I love it. This was awesome having you on, Matt. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to talk with you.
Pleasure.